Mostly I like to solve problems backwards. This might be me being contrarian. The first time I tried to get barcode scanning off the ground, it failed miserably. When 2008 came around, that's when smartphones were actually a thing. I grabbed Android Beta SDK and tried to get an app built that could do barcode scanning and price comparison. If your goal is to build a team, you need team players. One thing to look for when building your team is don't tolerate assholes. It was a happy accident for the most part. I just try enough to win sometimes, and that's kind of the playbook.
This is Code Story, bringing you in-depth interviews with tech visionaries, digging into critical moments of what it takes to change an industry, and build and lead a team that has your back. I'm Noah Labhart, and on today's episode, how in 2006 Rylan Barnes made a way to read barcodes on your phone and accidentally changed the way we shop. All this and more on Code Story. For some builders, there's a moment where creativity is catalyzed. For others, it starts much earlier. Rylan Barnes has been working with technology since childhood, starting out by simply programming his Legos to move. And all the way through college, building early marketplaces for college students to trade textbooks. And building automated chessboards so that invisible robots could play chess against each other. When he started creating a solution for mobile phone barcode scanning, he had no idea the doors it would open, and eventually lead to the formation of his most successful product, venture, and exit, called ShopSavvy. So I think everyone wants to know how you started ShopSavvy.
It was a happy accident for the most part. So at the time, this was 2008, I was really into graphics processing and the mobile space. And the mobile space back in early 2008 was still your flip phone. But I really liked building whatever you could build on flip phones back then. And so I had an idea. It was kind of birthed out of Textbook Trader and the price comparison stuff I did. I thought a great application of price comparison would be kicking that off with scanning barcodes. So what I tried to do was get barcode scanning working on a flip phone back in 2005, actually. Turns out that was bad timing. It just wasn't. Timing is everything. It really is. And the first time I tried to get barcode scanning off the ground, it failed miserably. But when 2008 came around, that's when smartphones were actually a thing. You couldn't actually build stuff for smartphones yet, but the Android Beta SDK was just announced, and so and Apple wasn't really done with theirs yet. So I grabbed Android Beta SDK and tried to get an app built that could do barcode scanning and price comparison, and that's how it was kicked off.
So with the Android Beta SDK, that's not something that was available to the world, right? That was something available to a smaller group of developers.
It was available to the world. Actually, it's just no one cared. No one really. It would be fun to show screenshots of what it looked like back then.
I believe I remember.
It was. Well, and if you look up the origins of Android too, it's super interesting. Like what it was originally intended for, like the very early origins of Android, I believe, was meant to be used on other devices like digital cameras. And so the interface was very, very primitive. D-pad navigation, and maybe there was a keyboard, and it was not very smartphone-esque. Uh-huh. It was quite different. Android has done a wonderful job of evolving into a very rich smartphone UI these days. But that was a long journey. They came from a very humble place, actually. The way that Android was initially set up was meant to be able to run on anything. I used to joke that Android was built to run on anything you could imagine, including your toaster. It kind of stumbled into smartphones, from what I gather. But so yeah, it was available to everybody, but just most people didn't care.
Okay.
Because they just didn't know what smartphones could do yet.
So by doing that, you entered into some challenge, right? Some sort of competition for who could build the most awesomest thing.
Yeah.
Is that right?
Yeah, so Google was trying to promote Android. So Google knew to have a successful platform, they were going to need developers on it. So they actually created this competition that were to see who could actually build the best app for Android. I figured I tried that same idea from 2005, took it off the shelf and dusted it off and tried it again on this new tech, and it worked fantastic. What I did was I was actually at the time working at another startup that was in the event ticketing space. My brother and I actually both worked there together, which was awesome. And I took a week off of work so that I could actually learn the Android SDK. Read everything all the documentation that was published at the time, cover to cover, so I knew it well. And then I spent the next 6 months moonlighting to build this app. At the time, it was called Go-Kart. Not that was a good name or anything.
It's an awesome name.
Certainly too clever by half. It was supposed to be your shopping cart on the go, but what that was it was an extension of the old textbook trader stuff. So I had experience building a price comparison search engine, and if I could actually use the camera in the smartphone to scan a barcode, that it would be a great way to kick off that process. You wouldn't have to spend time fumbling around typing on your keyboard.
Right.
And so that worked well. So I entered it into the competition and ended up winning first prize, which was excellent. Winning that competition ended up getting the application a whole lot of attention because now suddenly OEMs started getting interested in what can showcase their hardware.
Sure.
And carriers started getting interested in what can help them sell phones. They started talking with a lot of the winners of the competition about cross promotions, about actually as using the apps to promote the phone. And so, fortunately for me, the T-Mobile wanted to actually use my application to help promote the original Android phone, the G1.
That's really cool.
The funny story about that, though, is that they didn't like the name.
They didn't like Go-Kart.
They did not like Go-Kart.
Okay.
They actually said that, we've chosen to go with you, but you're going to have to use the name ShopSavvy.
So T-Mobile is the one that came up with ShopSavvy, or forced their hand on ShopSavvy.
T-Mobile was the one that came up with the name. It was too good to pass up. Plus, Go-Kart wasn't really the best name anyways, so so ShopSavvy it was.
So when you won this competition, was it just you got some funding from this competition too, right?
Yeah. There was a prize money for winning the competition.
And with that, you were able to kind of build a team and continue working on it, or what would you do with that?
Yeah. So I went without a salary for the next 3 years. So that's where that went.
The truth of startups.
Yeah.
This episode is sponsored by Vanta. You're a startup founder. Finding product market fit is probably your number one priority. But to land bigger customers, you also need security compliance. And obtaining your SOC 2 or ISO 27001 certification can open those big doors. But they take time and energy pulling you away from building and shipping. And that's where Vanta comes in. Vanta is the all-in-one compliance solution helping startups like yours get audit ready and build a strong security foundation quickly and painlessly. How, you ask? Vanta automates the manual security tasks that slow you down, helping you streamline your audit. And the platform connects you with trusted vCISOs to build your program, auditors to get you through audits quickly, and a marketplace for essentials like pen testing. Join over 8,000 companies, including many Y Combinator and Techstars startups who trust Vanta. Simplify compliance and get $1,000 off at vanta.com/codestory. That's vanta.com/code story.
So 3 years after that happened, trying to get this company off the ground, we ended up raising a Series A from some investors. One of them was Eduardo Saverin, the Facebook co-founder.
Ah, it's amazing.
And they were good times. Yeah, but we skipped a little part of the story too, though. There's a fun part about bringing ShopSavvy to the iPhone, though. Yeah, so the iPhone was more challenging than Android, partly because while the SDK did come out much later than Android, Apple still didn't allow camera access until a couple versions later.
Wow, okay.
And so you could fake it a little bit by actually tapping into some private APIs, but Apple would kick you out of their store if you did those shenanigans. We had to wait what felt like forever to actually get ShopSavvy onto the iPhone. But that wasn't the end of the challenge on iPhone. The first couple generations of iPhones had a fixed focus lens in their camera. So on Android, there's an autofocus camera, and you had that lens cycling back and forth to focus in on whatever distance the actual object is.
Sure.
And so you could get that camera 6 inches away from the barcode and still be able, as long as you can hold it still enough for long enough, you could get that sample that was actually in focus. On the iPhone, if you get 6 inches away, it was just blurry. And scanning a blurry 1D barcode is actually a lot more difficult. To solve the problem if you're on just a regular computer, you might use some blind deconvolutions to try and get past the blur, then run it through just a stock decoder. Mm-hmm. But these early smartphones didn't have enough computational power to actually do that type of stuff. Certainly couldn't do it more than multiple times per second, like you need to do if you're trying to actually scan a barcode in real time. So,
and that's essentially like running the blurry image through a sharpener, so to speak, to make the bars sharper. Right. Okay.
Right. So to solve that problem, I built something called Meatloaf,
which is a great name.
At the time, there was a food theme to all the projects. Everything
was that alignment with Google too.
Well, the other projects were taquito and chalupa and quail, and so this one was Meatloaf. But the way Meatloaf worked, though, is that it tried to actually solve the problem backwards. So instead of actually taking a blurry sample and sharpening it, which is computationally intensive, it would actually take fragments of known barcodes and then blur them and then compare it piecewise to the sample for similarity. And turns out that was actually like a much faster way to do it. And it took a while to get right. It was pretty challenging, but it worked.
Wow.
And it was that was a second helpful thing in the early days. In addition to getting all the love from T-Mobile and other manufacturers, being one of the only apps that could scan a barcode on iPhone was also super helpful too.
Sure.
And so those two things together was like catching lightning in a bottle.
Yeah.
And also beyond just having good graphics tech, we did have a really fantastic backend too. So after the barcode was decoded, our price comparison search engine had wider coverage and fresher prices, and it was just more accurate than anything else out there. So users loved us. It was great. Those were good times.
Totally amazing. How did you come up with the reverse engineering idea for Meatloaf?
Well, it was mostly I like to solve problems backwards.
Okay, let's dive into that. So you like to solve problems backwards. What does that look like for you?
I had a sneaky suspicion that doing something like that might be possible, and so I started doing some research and found out that there was actually someone else already using that approach. So at the time, Will Shipley and Mike Matas was actually working for Delicious Monster, and they had a barcode scanner to actually add things to your library, like either books or movies. And I'm not quite sure if that's the approach that they were using, but I think it was. Found some info buried deep in forums that I think maybe that's what they were doing.
Sure.
But it was enough confirmation for me to give it a try and actually spend months trying to crack that problem.
Right.
And so invested the time to make it work, and thankfully it went somewhere. Yay!
That's incredible. As you were building this, obviously you had to think through like, okay, I have limited technology, or the technology is limited where it is right now, right? The phones, the cameras, the barcode scanners, or really just the cameras and the quality of yours. What other trade-offs did you have to make, and kind of how did you cope with those decisions in the short term? Being this grand visionary of the ideal tech state, how did you process all that?
Oh, well, the interesting thing about barcode scanning is that we always thought that it would be commoditized eventually. So that sort of this early mover advantage would one day be gone. It just wouldn't matter anymore. And so that was, even though we were able to solve that problem, we never worked to make that our core. So what we did is we did spend some time trying to make that work for us as best as possible. It worked great for acquiring customers because it was a great product. Other apps actually wanted to license our tech. So we were able to license Meatloaf to Macy's, Sam's Club, Price Grabber, CNET, and that was good.
Yeah. So it's basically a side revenue stream.
Yeah.
Based on your SDK that you built for ShopSavvy.
Right. We didn't spend too much time on those initiatives. We were trying to play the consumer game.
Sure.
Go after the shoppers.
Right. So that's a great segue into how your product progressed after that. So where did you go next?
So we had great traction in the beginning. It attracted some attention from investors, allowed us to build a team, and we tried to take all that momentum and then level it up, take it to the next level. So at that point, we tried a whole bunch of experiments to try, and I guess you could call them pivots, because we technically had product market fit. We just figured that there was a ceiling to what we were doing right now, and there was a much bigger pie to go after.
Sure.
In the shopping space.
How did you determine the experiments to go through? What process did you go through for that?
I don't think it was all that organized of a process.
Okay. It's like, this is a good idea. Let's try this.
I think it was a lot of just trying stuff out.
Got it.
And it wasn't even just one process. I mean, we tried to be organized about it. We tried to be disorganized about it. We ran a lot of experiments. We had a lot of time to try things out.
All while people were still using ShopSavvy and its core purpose that you felt there was a ceiling for at some point.
Right.
Okay.
Yeah. That part was both a blessing and a curse.
Okay.
I mean, it was a blessing in the sense that it allowed us to try and level up, to actually even have a turn at bat, but also trying to come up with an entirely new premise without letting go to an original premise is like serving two masters.
Sure.
And so that was proving to be a real big challenge.
Yeah.
It is very hard to reinvent yourself. Education is the hardest part. Like educating your users.
Sure.
Is one of the hardest parts.
Right.
And doing that while also alienating your original user base.
Right.
Makes it double hard.
Right. So you ran these experiments that led to some pivots, and then you went through the struggle of, okay, we're going to pivot. How did you go about that process, and what did it feel like as far as the curse part?
Well, learned a lot in those years. Learned a lot about team dynamics. Learned a lot about building products. Learned a lot about iterating. Learned a lot about testing, talking to users. Learned a lot about all that stuff.
What was your biggest takeaway, though? If you learned a lot, what was the number one thing you learned?
Well, one thing that can help through a bunch of experimentation and a bunch of pivots is having a strong core vision from the founders. Vision is not something that you can delegate or outsource, for sure. We even did some experiments around that, where it's like, okay, so here's two guys running a shopping startup. Perhaps we can find some people that are experts in shopping that they know the space or love the space more than we do. Because just to rewind a little bit, like it's a little bit of a happy accident that I started a shopping startup. I mean, what got me here was I was actually trying to solve a problem around graphics processing and the mobile space.
Right.
That was actually the intersection of the two things I was interested in at the time. But it turns out, the best practical application of barcode scanning on a smartphone is price comparison, which led to a shopping startup. So
what you're saying is you don't like to shop?
I'm not a shopper.
Not a shopper.
I'm not a shopper.
Okay.
But you can't delegate vision. And so, I mean, if you want a unified team, and if you want cohesion, and if you want a team that trusts each other and that high functioning output, it does have to come from the founders. Mm-hmm. About these are our goals. This is our purpose. This is the problem that we're trying to solve. If you're going to do a lot of experimentation, that is something that is going to have to be led by the founders.
This episode is sponsored by Kinsta. Between juggling client meetings, managing your website, and keeping up with everyday tasks, who has the time to stress out about website security? Well, with Kinsta, the technical stuff is taken care of, so you can focus on what you do best. Kinsta provides managed hosting for WordPress, offering lightning-fast load times, top-tier security, and unmatched human-only customer support. Whether you're a business owner, web developer, or running a digital agency, Kinsta makes managing your website easy and efficient. Kinsta provides enterprise-grade security, being one of the few hosting providers for WordPress with SOC 2 and other certifications, guaranteeing the highest level of security for your website. Thanks to their unlimited free expert-led migrations, Kinsta ensures a smooth transition for you from other hosting providers. Customers have reported 200% faster load times post-migration to their platform. What I find cool about Kinsta is their fast and reliable customer service and premium features that are included at no extra cost. Ready to experience Kinsta's hosting for yourself? Get your first month free when you sign up at kinsta.com today. That's KINSTA.com.
So do you feel like that you had that clear vision for execution for what you were trying to do, you and the other founders?
What I would say is that we did a lot of experiments, and the ones that were better were the ones where the team was all on the same page.
Got it.
And all together and all, this cohesive unit. The time where the team performed the worst is where there was a lack of direction and purpose due to delegation, for example.
Got it. So
due to delegating the vision.
The vision part of it, right? It needs to come from the top. Tell me about how you built your team. How did you go about picking the people who were going to work for you, essentially, and build this vision?
Every scrappy way that you can. I was this 26-year-old moron. It's really hard. It's really hard to get people to follow you when you're a 26-year-old moron. I to that point, I will say, I've worked with a bunch of amazing people, and throughout my years, like dozens of amazing people. It was every single person that actually joined. I was really just stunned that they did. I guess the takeaway there is when people are deciding to join, it's a very complicated equation. There's a lot of things to consider.
Sure.
And looking back on it, you can actually kind of see some of those variables take effect over the years. So I had lunch with a lot of my old teammates today, and it's interesting hearing them talk about team dynamics, because they've moved on to other gigs.
So how let me bring you back to the team then. How did you structure your team based on what you were going to build? And how did you pick them? How did you say that person's going to be a winner? That's the winning horse.
Honestly, I don't think I was very good at picking people.
Okay. Tell me about that.
The interesting thing about me is I think my radar was quite broken in that department.
Okay.
A lot of the people that I thought were going to be the biggest contributors and provide the most value ended up being quite the opposite. And also a lot of the people that I didn't think were going to make much of a difference ended up being just invaluable resources. I hate calling them resources. Well, one thing about team that I learned the hard way is that I put a lot of stock in volume.
Okay.
So
what does that mean?
I think people tend to value things that they tend to overvalue things that they are personally weak in.
Okay.
Like self-marketing, right? Like, telling people how great you are. I'm terrible at that. It just sort of maybe isn't a thing of overcompensation. People that do market themselves well, I've always seemed to sort of put a lot of stock in that. And, I used to, when bringing people onto the team, I used to pay a lot of attention to how much attention people got.
Okay.
I would sort of use that as a signal for, how talented they were.
Sure.
And again, that was rooted in my own weakness, where I'm not good at that, and so I overvalue that.
Sure. So this could be positive or negative attention.
Yeah, positive or negative attention.
Right.
And I've since done a complete reversal on that. All the loud people, people that they're very good at, like, promoting themselves.
Yeah.
Very good at presenting how great they are. The people that I thought were obviously good picks because it was obvious, it was well marketed. Most of the time, they were actually outperformed by the people that were just quiet and heads down and just banging it out. It was a hard lesson for me to learn. It's kind of, at this point, it's almost a bit of an anti-pattern for myself.
Okay.
Where now when I see people that do a lot of self-promotion, now I'm wondering if that is maybe compensating for something.
Sure.
One thing to look for when building your team is just don't tolerate assholes. It's far more trouble than it's worth. It's not even close. Mm-hmm. They might be able to produce in isolated settings, but if your goal is to build a team, you need team players. The best team players that I have had, the ones that have actually contributed to the team with a multiplier effect with their other teammates and had this amazing impact and long-lasting impact and like loyal impact on the team, stuck around for years and produced just so much value for such a long time, were the people with their heads down, just quietly and continuously creating awesome. If you have people that are not team players on your team, it's not just something that you can just put in a corner or try to isolate from your team. It actually will take away from your team. It's a negative impact on your team, not just a zero impact or a, sometimes positive, sometimes nothing impact. It actually hurts the rest of your team.
Okay, so where'd you go next? Trying to find and reinvent yourself in ShopSavvy.
Yeah, so it wasn't so much reinventing as it was to level up. Mm-hmm. We had a whole bunch of really great momentum, and we figured we could actually leverage that momentum to slingshot us into this lasting place in the mobile shopping space. Mm-hmm. And so we did a whole bunch of experiments to try and capture that next lightning in a bottle.
So you were in Dallas. You guys had an office in Dallas. At some point, you expanded into San Francisco too, right?
That's true. Yeah. After we had raised our Series A, we opened up an office in San Francisco. We had an office just right across the street from the creamery. The goal was to attract that Silicon Valley talent.
Sure. How did that work out?
It worked out pretty well, honestly. It's so different out there. It's great out there. I love it out there, honestly.
Yeah.
I miss going there. I wish I could go more.
Sure.
It's my kind of place, honestly. I have a lot of good things to say about it.
That's
You
great.
know, I mean, honestly, I don't think I have anything bad to say about it. It's a whole different world out there, but man, I love it all.
Very different from Texas.
Yeah, it's super different from Texas. The mentality about things is different. It's so fearless out there, and I love that about it. People go and do stuff. I mean, they jump in with both feet, and I don't see that a lot here. I see a lot more calculated moves. Not that I don't respect that, I do. There's a lot of I think there's a higher average age out here. There's larger mortgages, more kids.
Sure.
There's a lot more commitments, perhaps.
Yeah.
But there's just a lot more risk taking out there, which makes it's just a lot more fun. It's fun to watch.
Obviously, there was a step where you guys exited. Can you walk us through any of that story?
Sure. So we tried a lot of experiments. Each experiment sort of resulted in things that didn't work. You know, you sort of take the results and try to leverage the parts that did work into the next thing, and let go of the stuff that did not work. And we were on to some pretty great stuff towards the end of our startup days. We had just a fantastic product and pricing database. We had some machine learning efforts that were pretty unique at the time.
Yeah, ahead of its time.
And we had some really great traction with users. So all that together actually did get the attention of quite a few people. We spent probably about 10 months talking to, doing the roadshow. And it eventually boiled down to selling ShopSavvy. It was about December of 2015. Yeah. We ended up selling to a company called Perch. They were a digital publishing company. A lot of what they do, they write reviews. They do a lot of things, but one of the things they do is write reviews for products. And they get a lot of high intent traffic, people that actually want to buy a very specific item, and their whole business was revolved around decision enablement. And so they help these potential customers make these buying decisions by trying to answer all their questions about the product up front in these reviews. And they have links to send them out to retailers to actually buy it. Our back-end technology with our product database and the price comparison search engine was a very excellent complement to the work that they were doing there. And so that was one of the reasons they bought us. The second reason was also to kickstart their mobile efforts. Since we had a giant user base on mobile,
Sure.
That was appealing to actually get the ball rolling quickly.
And giant user base is nearly 50 million downloads, right?
Yes.
Yes, that's the giant user base. Okay, I want to clarify that.
It's big. You play the game long enough and
You get 50 million downloads, is that it?
it can happen. It can happen. But we had been running as a startup for 7 years at that point by the time we sold.
When you were building ShopSavvy and maturing ShopSavvy, obviously you had to solve different problems externally for your consumers and your pivots and your experiments, but also internally in figuring out how to do things better. Did you have any opportunities or projects that you worked on that ended up being their own sort of thing?
So there was at one point we were doubling down on design and to try and do some experimentation around having a top-notch user experience for the user and seeing how that reacts and how that actually changes engagement. Our designers were actually creating just some really fantastic work, and it ended up being a lot to keep up with from an engineering standpoint, because we weren't just implementing these designs inside the app. There's also millions of product images to actually account for, because some of the designs actually called for tweaks to the product images themselves, or maybe the users themselves. We did a lot of experiments around social shopping too. Some images needed to actually be, cropped into a circle, for example. It sounds pretty basic, but you do have to do that 3 times. The way you do it on iOS is one way. It's a different way on Android, and a totally different way on the web. Sometimes whether it be something as simple as having this bottom fade gradient at the bottom of the image so that you can overlay text on it in a way that's legible.
Sure.
Or maybe knowing, all right, is the image that we're dealing with, is it a full bleed image, or where you have artwork that goes edge to edge, like that's common with books or movies, or is it this sort of studio shot where everything surrounding the image is actually white? Little nuances like that can actually have major impacts to the way you design something.
Certainly.
So we were doubling down on design, and it was putting a strain on the engineers. And we had this gap between the engineering team and the design team that was actually, it was a wide gap, and it was actually a lot of work to actually manage. Design was striving for pixel perfect implementation, and engineering had more work than time. What I did was I actually kind of spent the next couple nights and weekends working on just a new experiment to try and shorten that gap between the two teams.
Okay.
And the project was called Ximage, and I just built it as this open source project. It's still out on GitHub. You can grab it if you want. But it was, at the time, it was pretty novel. And what it did is it was actually real-time image transformations. What it would do, it ended up actually giving a lot more control to the design team in the final outcome of their designs. And so if they had some requirements coming down the pipe, hey, we want to actually load this really lightweight version of the image first so that you're not looking at like a blank screen. You actually have this, it'll be blurry, but it'll be, a tenth the size of the other image, and we can download them both at the same time. And we can have something to show early before the high resolution one comes in.
Right.
Things like that. They could just take care of that by putting parameters on the query string. And these parameters could be anything from the image quality, or certain effects like applying a blur, or making it grayscale, or cropping it to a circle, or even overlaying layers on top of layers. So if you wanted to actually, crop it in a circle, apply a white stroke on the outside, and have a drop shadow beneath it, right? You only do that once, and it's the same query string, and it looks exactly the same, pixel perfect, on all 3 platforms, web, iOS, and Android. So everybody loved it. It was great.
And so that was all handled through Ximage.
Yeah.
You've had a long run in the tech space. You've had an exit. You've had side projects. What is next for you? What are you hoping for in the future?
Yeah, my life is filled with these fun ironies of like, what I should have done and what I ended up doing. And some of the stuff I'll be working on next is a remedy to that. So I love the open source space, and yet I have never ever actually contributed to it. I've always just been watching it from afar, from whatever I'm working on. Either I was employed by some company that just everything they do is proprietary, or it just didn't really have a place in the startup that I was running. But I've always loved the open source space. I want to actually, do something there.
What was the first programming language you've learned?
Logo Writer. Yeah, boy.
Logo Writer.
What year was that? I think it was still the 80s. And for those of you that don't know Logo Writer, it's a educational language to teach kids how to code. And you make a turtle move around the screen and draw stuff.
Right.
And if you're really clever, you can actually do fancy stuff with sprites and maybe make a game and stuff like that. Things got really interesting when I discovered you can actually plug your Legos into the computer and drive interactions using Logo Writer.
Nice.
So it turned into a sort of robotics thing where you can actually build stuff and make it react and do stuff.
That's where it all started. Okay, so what about an architect or a CTO or a tech person you look up to?
Honestly, I've loved watching Miguel de Casa all these years.
Okay.
So he's a big name in the open source crowd.
Okay.
I love the stuff he's built. GNOME, for example, is one of them. But I also, I mean, he just keeps it so real. He just follows what's good. He doesn't pay attention to stuff that doesn't matter. You know, he has an excellent sense of actually judging things based on their merit and not their marketing. And he's right every time. Honestly, I love it. I just love it. He's also, so he is one of the big names in Mono. So his past is so very eclectic, and that's one of the things I love about him. So he comes from the world of Linux. He's always been in the world of open source. He adopted C# a long time ago in the name of Mono, and making .NET run everywhere, essentially. He currently works for Microsoft, which historically has been openly hostile to open source.
Sure.
He loves iPhones, which is, you know, if it's not the open source version of the smartphone world, so to speak. He's just so talented, and he just always judges things based on their merit, and just an honest assessment of that, an honest, unadulterated filter on, like, no, this is good, because I say so, and even though everybody's telling me otherwise, and I've over the past 10 years I've always just agreed with the direction that he's been going. I've always just thought that.
If you could go back to the beginning, what would you do different?
That's a good question. You know, one of the best things you can do is actually find a good mentor. A good mentor will help you avoid so many mistakes. Probably because they made the mistakes themselves already before you.
Sure.
It's a great time saver. Yeah, if I had to do it all over again, I would actually find a good mentor on day one. This is one of the blessings in disguise that I had, is that I actually thought I had found a mentor. Turns out that I was wrong about that. But that person actually introduced me to someone else who actually sort of accidentally became my mentor. So I'm very grateful for that.
Yeah, that's a good network of network.
Yeah, thing. I owe this person everything. They've just taught me so much and have helped me so much, and I couldn't be more grateful. I owe them everything.
What lessons have you learned that you will apply to future projects?
One is the value of having a good team. And two is also what those teammates are actually looking for. You know, building a good team it's not just something that happens by luck. You know, that good teammates stick around for reasons. If you know what they are, you can build a good team. And so a lot of it has to do with building trust. A lot of it has to do with like Daniel Pink's AMP model, autonomy, mastery, purpose, and if you can actually create that environment, the rest will follow.
Awesome, Rylan. It has been a pleasure to have you on the Code Story podcast. Thank you for being here.
Thanks, man. I hope I didn't mess up your podcast.
I'm keeping that in. And this concludes another chapter of Code Story. Code Story is a production of TouchTap LLC and is hosted and produced by Noah Laupart, co-produced and edited by George Macharko. Special thanks to Deanna Chapman and Stephanie Campisi for their promotional support. Be sure to subscribe on iTunes, Google Play, Breaker, or the podcasting app of your choice. Make sure to check us out at codestory.co or follow us on Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, or LinkedIn.
Taxes was feeling so stuck. Sitting in traffic, squeezing into a parking spot, all to squeeze in getting tax help during your lunch break. Now Taxes is a TurboTax expert who does your taxes for you, while you go about your day getting real-time notifications about their progress and the most money back guaranteed. Now this is Taxes. Intuit TurboTax. Get an expert now on TurboTax.com. Only available with TurboTax Live Full Service, real-time updates only in iOS mobile apps. See guarantee details at TurboTax.com/guarantees.